All right, welcome back to the OnTrack videocast. So today we're talking about something that I see all too often in my practice, probably with every single client that I work with has some degree of this. Over 35 million people in the US it affects. It is the seventh most common diagnosis amongst all physicians and the most common diagnosis made by gastroenterologists. And this is why I have brought my good friend, Dr. Kenneth Brown, in to talk about irritable bowel syndrome. So Dr. Ken Brown received his medical degree from the University of Nebraska Medical School and completed his fellowship in gastroenterology in San Antonio, Texas. He is a board-certified gastroenterologist and has been in practice for over 15 years with a clinical focus on inflammatory bowel disease and irritable bowel syndrome. Dr. Brown declared that his mission is to bridge the gap between medical and natural science. For over a decade, he has been conducting clinical research for various pharmacologic companies. Dr. Brown recognized an unmet need for something natural that could help his IBS patients find real relief. After developing the only natural and clinically proven answer for IBS and bloating for over 6 years, Atrantil launched in the summer of 2015. Dr. Brown developed Atrantil to help those suffering from the symptoms of IBS, which we now know are caused by bacterial overgrowth. Welcome, Dr. Ken.
Karen, thank you so much. It is an honor to be on your show. OnTrack, I love it. That was a great intro. Thank you.
Yes, it was a long bio, but it was all necessary because I just love that here you are, a medical doctor who was seeing that there was not enough being done for your patients and decided to do something about it. So tell me a little bit about how that happened.
So this all started well over 10 years ago. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist. I'm a traditionally trained medical doctor. And I was doing clinical research. I had developed a research division of our practice, and I was doing clinical research for pharmaceutical companies. And it was at that time that I had started collaborating with some different scientists, one of them being Dr. Mark Pimentel out of Cedars-Sinai, great guy who discovered that all these people that we were labeling as having irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, could potentially actually have bacteria growing where it shouldn't be, meaning that bacteria are growing in an area of your gut which should normally be sterile. So when that happens, every time they would eat, they would have all the symptoms of IBS. So we were doing a clinical trial for a big pharmaceutical company to look at something to help with that. It was at that time where he showed to me that he had animal models where if bacterial overgrowth, the thing that we're talking about, actually happened and a type of bacteria produced different types of gases, one of them being methane, that the antibiotic that we were studying wouldn't help these people. And the reason why it wouldn't help them is because that type of bacteria is a very ancient bacteria that our modern day antibiotics don't help. So 10 years ago, I'm sitting here working with this. I feel like I'm really excited. I'm changing the whole industry. We're moving things. And then we hit this brick wall where it's like, we'll never be able to help these people that bloat and are constipated. We have nothing to offer them. And I had this aha moment. My research manager at the time is from Iowa. I'm actually from Nebraska, the middle of the United States where lots of cattle are. And there was some mandates with the legislation to try and add food products to decrease methane production in cattle. And that was the aha moment that we went, wow, wait a minute. We can take some of this knowledge that people have done already looking at cattle, and we can apply it to humans and really make a big difference. And that's how we developed Atrantil. That's how it all started. 10 years ago, that's what we started working on. And then we were able to develop a product and launch it.
Oh, wow. All from thanks to cows. I didn't know that. That's kind of fascinating because I have heard about that methane overgrowth in cows from, it's all the corn they eat, is it not?
Well, the idea is that cattle, they're ruminants, so they have the 4-chamber stomach, and they actually need these bacteria to help break down the food that we're giving them, corn being one of them. And so these bacteria break it down, they produce methane, and we have millions and millions of cows burping methane into the environment, which is actually leading to the greenhouse effect. or it sort of affects the ozone. So it's very funny that my story really comes down to a bloated cow. And that bloated cow, because of trying to protect the environment, led to the science that we actually figured out that we could help people and not make bloated humans because of this.
Wow. So let's just back it up for a second, because we were talking before this and I was saying that, IBS is kind of like this little blanket term that I remember thinking way back in the day before I went to nutrition school that IBS just simply meant diarrhea. And it was then that once I got through school and stuff, I was like, oh, this actually can mean so many different things. So can you just explain what kind of falls under that in the doctor scope?
Oh my goodness. So the problem with a diagnosis like irritable bowel syndrome is that when you are told that you have IBS, that essentially is what I call a trash can diagnosis. That means that you have gone to a doctor, you get blood work done, possibly you go to a specialist like me as a gastroenterologist. You may even have an endoscopy and colonoscopy done. And then when you wake up from anesthesia, you get patted on the head and says, good news, nothing's wrong. You just have IBS. And then my patient will go home. You will go home and you'll go, I just was labeled. I don't really have a diagnosis. Now I have a label. That's it. And there's some other diseases that are like that. Fibromyalgia is one of them. And we know that people that have restless leg syndrome is one of them, pelvic pain. There's a lot of diseases that we don't really understand. And so we just put a label on it and say, you just have IBS. Well, that is how I started to become very passionate about this, because I had people that were very, very miserable, even though they had a disease that was not killing them. So IBS is something that the true diagnosis is so vague. It's if you have abdominal pain, which is relieved with defecation, going to the bathroom, and it's lasted more than 3 months, you qualify. It is the silliest. So even though I'm a specialist in irritable bowel syndrome, I never label, I shouldn't say never, but I almost never label a patient as having IBS. I feel like if you have a diagnosis of IBS, we are missing your true diagnosis. So you may have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. You may have gluten intolerance. You may have celiac disease. We're missing something. So I'm very, very different with how I approach irritable bowel syndrome. And when you, the listener, are sitting there and you go, wow, my doctor told me I have IBS. I just have to deal with it. That's not how I view it. I feel like that we have to find the real reason. So you can have irritable bowel syndrome with diarrhea, just like you said, or you can have irritable bowel syndrome with constipation. Stop and think for a second. We are labeling the patient with opposing symptoms. As a physician, I wrestled with that for so long. Karen, if you come to me and you go, well, I have a headache and I don't have a headache. I'm like, okay, well, you have one problem. You have, this other issue, which isn't a problem. You're going to come in with constipation or diarrhea, and we're going to call you the same thing. Yeah. That logically never made sense to me. Once we discovered that a lot of these people have bacterial overgrowth or bacteria growing where it shouldn't, then that explains it. If you have bacteria which are producing a certain type of gas, hydrogen sulfide, you'll have diarrhea. If you have bacteria producing methane, you will have constipation. So that's the beauty of this. We've knocked down the barrier of just labeling people, and we go, we're going to try and figure out what's wrong. And now we have a reason why you may be experiencing these different symptoms.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember going to my doctor years ago with pain in my stomach, and it was an ulcer, and him putting me on the PPIs, the proton pump inhibitors, and being like, here you go, just take these. And I was like, oh, okay. So how long do I take them for? Oh, indefinitely. Like I've always taken them. Just keep taking them. And that was it. Sent me on my way. And I was like, what? How can that be? And then having to, do my own research on it and figure it all out. But still, it just blows my mind that there isn't more, given to patients about digestive issues. And they've really become a part of so many people's everyday life that they don't even think that that's a problem. I see it all the time. I'll be like, patients will knock down, oh yeah, I'm constipated. I had one woman, she probably went to the bathroom like she went poo, maybe 4 times a month.
Oof.
And her whole life. And she had thought this, she was just like, yeah, I've always been that way. I'm like, but you don't have to. And no one's ever told her that that was a problem. She just thought, well, whatever. And I'm just thinking, come on.
I have, my whole clinic is filled with women coming to me, and the first thing I do is I say, let's talk poop. And they get real embarrassed. And I was just like, no. This will tell me so much about your overall health. And once the embarrassment's gotten over, then it becomes, oh my gosh, I've been dealing with this forever. I have trouble going to the bathroom. I feel super bloated after I eat. When I do have the urge to go, I have trouble getting it out. And we get into real details about it because it gives me, the history tells me different things that we need to start looking at. And, you know, it's not just that you can't go to the bathroom, but we do know that when you have problems like this, it's probably the underlying cause of autoimmune disease, underlying cause of inflammation. And there's a lot of data now showing that if you've got bacteria growing where it shouldn't, you're producing methane. They're, not to get too sciencey, but there's labs that look at this and they have shown that mice that produce methane, way more. They actually have an obesity problem in mice, eating the same amount of calories as the normal mice, but because of the bacteria producing these different gases and leading to inflammation, it results in weight gain. So once I say that to my patients, they're like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I've been dealing with. I'm eating less and less, I'm bloated, and I'm putting on weight. I'm like, well, you know what? It may not be your fault. It may be because of the bacteria that are actually doing this to you.
Is it because the bacteria then, is that the main reason, because it's causing inflammation in the body? Can you kind of walk us through how, like, what's the chain reaction that leads to weight gain when it comes to IBS and constipation?
So it's so funny because you did the exact same thing that all my patients do. So what I'm worried about is I'm worried about inflammation in the body. And the only thing they hear is, oh, I can lose weight if I fix this.
Of course. If you
But,
relate anything to weight loss for women, they're sold.
so I'm going to back it up way back. So let's first talk about when somebody may be called irritable bowel, but we won't even label them as that. If your listener eats something specifically, let's say starchy, and they start blowing up, or they look 3 to 4 months pregnant, there is a high likelihood that they may have bacteria growing where it shouldn't be. And we call that bacterial overgrowth. So that bacteria, when it grows, what happens is you eat and the bacteria will break down the food before you can. And when that happens, it creates a lot of gas. Initially, hydrogen will be produced. And then depending on the type of bacteria, the type of bacteria which can produce methane can show up, and then methane is produced. And that leads to slowing everything down. When everything gets slowed down, that results in constipation. You absorb more calories per bite, and all the stuff that's going on right there creates inflammation in the intestines. Now, your body will react to that and think that something else is going on. It says, we have to get rid of this, but it doesn't really fight it like it's just an acute infection. It's always trying to get rid of it. And we know that what happens then is the inflammatory cascade, meaning your body reacts like it shouldn't be there, starts turning on the immune system. And when that starts turning on, it can actually overshoot and then develop autoimmune disease, meaning your body will start attacking itself, or at the very least, it creates inflammation. So when the inflammation is there, your body now has something else that it has to deal with. So it's spending a certain percentage of its time trying to fight this little, what it's considering an invader, that raises your cortisol level, which lowers your basal metabolic rate, meaning your body has decided that it's going to reserve some calories to fight this thing that happens to be a chronic condition. So I will see people that have this thing with bacteria that they went to Mexico, they got sick 5 years ago. Ever since then, they've been having this problem with bloating. And ever since then, they've developed Hashimoto's thyroiditis, they've developed thyroid issues, or they've developed other autoimmune issues like rheumatoid arthritis, and they've been putting on weight. I can go back and say, look, what I really think is going on is that 5 years ago, this happened, turned on your immune system. It's never been turned off. We will never be able to do that and control your autoimmune or your weight gain until we fix the original problem, which is that. So that's how come it all kind of spirals into its own little factory. And the more that it slows everything down, the more it allows more bacteria to grow. And that's why I'm a big believer. I realize that as a gastroenterologist, I'm very biased. I understand that, but I believe all health begins and ends in the gut. If your gut is not healthy, then you will lead to a lot of other issues.
Oh my gosh, you just said my story right there. That's so funny because I lived in Mexico when I was in my early 20s and lived in a very remote place that had no electricity, no cars to it. And I lived there for months out of the winter, every winter for years. And I got violently ill numerous times. I also traveled to India and got violently ill as well. And then over the coming years, had weight loss resistance, had weird skin rashes, migraines, and then hypothyroidism. So yes, this happens. And it's I had blastocystis hominis and I had too much methane. I was tested for SIBO and my methane was quite high. So here we go. Yeah. So, it happens.
So what's interesting is the blastocystis hominis is something that we can check for. It probably was not the real pathogen. The real pathogen was something known as Methanobrevibacter smithii, or a methane-producing bacteria. So we'll check stool all the time and we'll find blastocystis, but I will actually treat and get rid of the Archaeobacter, which is the one that produces the methane, and that's what helps all your symptoms. And that's why we actually developed Atrantil, to be honest, because that was my goal. When I was talking to Dr. Pimentel and he gave the whole story about, look, we're not gonna be able to help these people unless we get rid of the methane, that's when we spent the next 5 years looking at all that literature that was done on trying to decrease methane production with cattle. And we found that there happened to be a tree in South America, a very ancient tree, which has natural defense against fungus and Archaeobacter. That's the Archaeobacter that is the methane producer. And once we discovered that, we went, wow, we can make a huge difference in millions of people's lives. And we went forward with that. And that's how come Atrantil actually helps with this kind of situation. Everything you talked about. So whenever I travel, and first of all, you're very brave doing traveling all over the world. I love that. But whenever I travel, I make sure that I always take it because what we've learned is that about 20% of people that get an infectious gastroenteritis, meaning that you get, let's say, traveler's diarrhea, 20% of those people actually will develop chronic condition where it will affect the motility of the intestines and allow bacteria to grow. When that happens, we call that post-infectious IBS. Now we realize that's probably post-infectious SIBO. What happened to you is between Mexico and India and you got sick, your body reacted to it, it shocked your intestines and allowed bacteria to start growing. Once that happened, then you started experiencing all the consequences of that.
Right. So, and what else can it be caused from when we're talking about SIBO specifically? So it's not just parasites that cause this, is it?
No, it's not. So I see people, there's several things. So it all comes down to when we have our small intestine, it should be a relatively sterile environment. Think of it like a free-flowing crystal stream. So as it's flowing, then something affects the motility, meaning something stops it from moving as it should. So it's almost like damming up both ends of this beautiful crystal stream. Then you've turned it into a little bit of a pond, more of a cesspool. Bacteria can start growing, and we start feeding that bacteria with all the food that we eat. Things that can do that. A very stressful situation. It's like insult to injury. I have these wonderful patients of mine who will go through a bad divorce, or they'll go through the loss of a loved one, and then 2 months later they'll show up with these symptoms. It's because the sympathetic response, or your fight or flight, kicks in and your intestines don't move, and during that period bacteria can start growing. The second thing is taking antibiotics. You can disrupt a lot of things by taking antibiotics. I try so hard to avoid using antibiotics in my practice because we don't want to end up with a situation like this. The third thing, which we've already kind of talked about, which is any type of infection can lead to this. And then the final thing, which is right in your wheelhouse, which is food. When we start eating a lot of foods which are pro-inflammatory, processed foods, things which our body have a hard time digesting, very, very refined sugars, it can also be a perfect setup to have these bacteria start growing right there. So those are the main reasons that actually cause bacteria to start growing where they shouldn't be.
So when you see people that have this, and obviously you're giving them the Atrantil stuff to help with it, what kind of diet are you putting them on? Like, obviously we have to also think about the food, like you said, that people are eating. Do you have a specific, do you do low FODMAPs, or what's your belief on that?
So I really try and simplify it a little bit. So as a specialist, and certainly as a specialist where I get a lot of second opinions, most of my patients have already come and they've already tried to manipulate their diets. Some of them to an extreme amount where they're losing tremendous amounts of weight. They almost develop a food phobia. They're trying to figure out what it is. They feel like they're doing something. And when really it's out of your control. It's not that you're doing anything. It's that you've got these bacteria which are starting to control you now. So when we look at the different data that's all out there, there's the low FODMAP diet, which people knee-jerk and get on, which is a very good diet for decreasing the bloating. But now evidence is showing that after 3 months, you can start having micronutrient deficiency. So I'm not a big fan of doing FODMAP for very long. And then
Me neither.
Yeah, there's the SCD diet, there's enteral, there's a lot of different diets out there. Really what I try and get my patients to do, because it's a little bit more realistic, is I really try and have them go gluten-free. By going gluten-free, you take out a lot of the simple carbohydrates. You take out a lot of the stuff that you're opening a package. If you're opening packages and having your food, chances are you're having some stuff that's pretty hard to digest. So by going gluten-free, you take a lot of that out. And it's just a much easier, you don't have to think about it. I myself am gluten intolerant, and it took me a long time to figure that out. And once I got off gluten, I started feeling better. Now, we do know that the polyphenols in Atrantil can help people that have that as well. So I can actually eat a little gluten now as long as I have a little Atrantil on me, and that actually helps mitigate some of the symptoms. But I generally like to have people go gluten-free, and this gets into a little bit more of the autoimmune issue, but when you eat gluten, your body will react to it, and it'll produce a molecule called zonulin, which ultimately leads to leaky gut. So one of the reasons why I want to make sure that I get my patients off gluten during this period is by having the bacteria growing there, and you can have this inflammation, and then eating a lot of gluten, which leads to the possibility of causing leaky gut or intestinal permeability. That is the perfect setup for developing an autoimmune problem or developing more of a chronic situation. So I'm a little bit realistic and biased on why I want to get people off gluten while we're actually treating them.
Yes. Yeah, I would have to agree with that 100%. And can you tell us a little bit about how the product works? Like you said, it's a polyphenol. And I've also heard you talk about how it's a postbiotic.
Oh, our newest term that we're learning.
Yeah.
So Karen, what's so cool about this is I went into the initial research to try and help people with irritable bowel syndrome. We discovered this, and with all of it there, we figured out that we could do this naturally using Atrantil. Since we've gone forward, the 3 ingredients work together, which I'll get into in just a second, but it's the fact that we're using natural products called polyphenols. These polyphenols are the molecules in the skins of vegetables and fruits. It's the predominant molecule in the Mediterranean diet. We all know that the Mediterranean diet has been shown to be an anti-aging diet, anti-inflammatory diet. I was in Spain last summer, and it's frustrating when you see all these people that are still smoking, and they're eating dinner at midnight, and they're eating whatever they want, and they're outliving us. They're having a little bit more of a enjoyable life, and they're outliving the Western world. And I think one of the reasons is because of these polyphenols. So what these polyphenols do is they are the molecules that feed our bacteria in the colon. You have 100 trillion bacteria in your colon. They are actually there for you, but if you feed them the wrong thing, they'll be an enemy for you. So by feeding them what they want, they'll help you. These polyphenols go into the colon, and then the bacteria break them down into a whole new science called postbiotics. And I love that you brought that up. So that's the second tier. And we're working with scientists all over the world right now where this is the next door that has been knocked down. You've heard of prebiotics. We've got, probiotics. Now it's the postbiotics. And so, and this was brought up to my attention by scientists that are actually studying our product, Atrantil. They're like, look, we're looking at the metabolites of this. It's so exciting. You have such a concentrated volume of polyphenols in here that we're seeing this benefit. So that's the postbiotic, which is like a whole separate talk on itself. But let me tell you exactly how Atrantil, why we developed and why we put these three ingredients together. So knowing that bacteria are growing where they shouldn't be, and knowing that one of the bacteria that produce methane, which creates bloating and constipation and weight gain, bloating, constipation, is known as an Archaeobacter. When we discovered that this tree has this natural defense against it, by looking at a lot of other literature regarding what foods to give cattle, we discovered that horse chestnut or conker tree shuts off the enzyme to produce it. And then we realized by putting peppermint polyphenol, not the oil, very specifically the leaf, it'll actually work together to get rid of this bacteria. So if you think of it this way, if you have bacteria growing where it shouldn't, then the first ingredient, the peppermint, calms the area down. The second ingredient, the quebracho, comes in and it's this big, beautiful polyphenol molecule that doesn't get absorbed. That's the key. It has to work in the area where it's supposed to. If you take regular antibiotics, they get absorbed into the bloodstream, which is why it disrupts your microbiome. So the quebracho comes in and it starts soaking up all the gas, but most importantly, it weakens that bacteria called the Archaeobacter. And then the third ingredient, the horse chestnut, comes in and shuts off the enzyme that produces the methane. So when we initially developed this, we were looking very specifically on a molecular level about what it does to these bacteria. And then since we've launched, we've had so much success with people saying, listen, I feel better on it. So I'm better from the bloating, but I really just feel all around a little bit better taking it on a daily basis. That's when we started getting into this whole concept of postbiotics. And thank goodness different scientists have contacted me and said, look, do you know that this is going on? This is the newest wave. So you will see in the next 5 to 10 years, a lot of information regarding postbiotics, polyphenols, and so on. I've been working with some scientists also that are looking at like physical performance. And now we realize that polyphenols are extremely important for both pre-workout and recovery. So because it's an anti-inflammatory, so it allows your body to adapt. So this is a really exciting field. And I love the fact that we've piqued the interest of other bench researchers. And they contact me frequently and go, listen, I just had a lab, we did a study, and this is what we saw. And I'm like, that's so fascinating.
Wow. So people that are, working, it's not just for someone that's sick then. It can be for somebody that's, works out a lot, it can be kind of broad range. Hey, like what about yeast, candida?
That is a very interesting, that's a very interesting category and topic. So in the functional medicine world, before SIBO, everybody was labeled as candida. And as a traditionally trained medical doctor, I really wrestled with this because as a gastroenterologist, before we had good treatment for AIDS and patients that I would take a look at that were immunocompromised, meaning they didn't have an immune system due to chemotherapy, I would take a look with a camera and go into their stomach and I would see yeast everywhere coating, and it would be literally a thick white coat, and it could cover their esophagus, their stomach, their small bowel, because they didn't have an immune system to fight it.
Wow.
They never bloated. They never had any issues like that. Yeah. And so I wrestled with this. I just went, wow, because everybody in the functional medicine world has been talking about candida for so long, and this is what they're treating. And if you look at what they've been treating, they treat it very similar to SIBO. We realize that candida, and I'm going to sometimes alternate with Candida, it's tomato type thing, but the infectious disease doctors refer to it as Candida. And so when candida is there, I wrestled with it. I'm like, but these people don't bloat. They've got other issues. They've got bigger problems going on, cancer and AIDS. And then I started thinking about it. I went on a great guy, a good friend named Evan Brand. He did.
Yeah, I love Evan.
Yeah.
He's been on here before.
Oh, he has? Awesome. I did a Candida summit with him, and I got a chance to actually explain exactly what I'm going to tell you right now, which is Candida is a decomposing organism. In other words, when you feed it sugar, it will release carbon dioxide, CO2. CO2 freely absorbs through the intestine and you breathe it out. When I do colonoscopies on people, we use carbon dioxide. So I will scope somebody, I will go into their colon, I will fill their whole colon full of CO2 so I can see polyps and things. And when I pull out the scope, they go to recovery, they wake up, they're not bloated, they feel perfect because the CO2 has gone through the walls and they breathe it out. So I always wrestled with that where I'm like, how are we linking CO2 with bloating? And then it hit me. It's not just the microbiome, it's the multi-biome. This is what Evan and I talked about. The multi-biome is the interaction between Candida, microbiome, and even we're going to learn more. It's probably going to be viruses and parasites as we learn more and more. This is incredible. So if you have a Candida overgrowth and you're producing CO2, that carbon is used by the Archaeobacter and the hydrogen from the other bacteria to make CH4. So carbon, H4 is methane. So in other words, the Archaeobacter really can't form methane without having some carbon. So that's how the two link together. It's the multi-biome. So frequently now when I see people that are really resistant, I will treat the Candida, and I'll treat it not because I'm going to say that that's going to get you better on the bloating, but that little critter is feeding the other guy. They're all working together in this playground, the multi-biome. So that to me, that's how it all comes together. Logically, that makes a lot more sense to me. And I wrestled with it forever. And it was when I was preparing for Evan's Canada Summit that I went, that's it. That's our missing combination. It's not that one side is wrong. It's that they all come together in the multi-biome. And we have to control all of it, because if you have overgrowth of one, it'll feed the other, and then it'll cause symptoms, and so on and so on.
Right. And so when you're treating with Atrantil, do you also use biofilm disruptors, or is it because does it get at it? Biofilm disruptors, for those that don't know, it's things that will break down the outer shell of a bacteria is kind of the best way to put it, I think.
Yeah. So I focus mostly, I really have not had to use a whole lot of biofilm disruptors. In my field, the biofilm that has the greatest concentration of bacteria is actually in the colon. So the colon has a mucus layer. If you think of it this way, if you have the lumen of the colon, there's a mucus layer all the way around. And in that mucus layer lives this whole colony of bacteria, which is the biofilm. That actually helps produce energy for you. They form fatty acids and things like that whenever you eat undigestible fibers. In the small bowel, the biofilm I have found is not something that I need to aggressively attack, because if I can just get rid of the intraluminal bacteria, or the bacteria living right in the middle, because those are the guys that are having the party whenever you eat. So I typically can get away with just doing a Atrantil, possibly a little antifungal if it's difficult to treat, and a promotility agent. Remember, I get back to the original thing. Anything that affects the motility goes from clear stream to a cesspool or a sewer pipe. I want that motility moving. I want free flowing fluid. So 4 out of 5 people are going to get better with taking Atrantil 2 capsules 3 times a day for a full 20 days. Those people that don't, then I start thinking of other things. And then if we rule out other things, then I come back to the recalcitrant person, the 10% of the people that really don't respond to much. And that's the area that we're really focusing our research in right now. Fascinating that a lot of these people that I treat, and I treat almost exclusively people that have failed everything now, over time, we can get them better. So your listener, you at home right now that's watching this, if you're frustrated, just know that there's still a lot of people out there thinking we're breaking down a lot of barriers, and there's don't give up hope, because there's a lot of cool things going on right now. And I feel super excited that we're going to be able to make a huge change in how people feel and break this whole cycle of inflammation.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. Like, you're obviously very passionate about it. And I appreciate the fact that you wanted to do more for your patients, and you went on this kind of lifelong journey of discovering this product. And I don't talk about a lot of like specific products in this show, but I really do believe in this one. And I know from my own experience and from working with so many clients that this is something that is widespread, that everybody's having it. It doesn't just affect it doesn't just make you bloated or diarrhea or constipated. It also is affecting your weight and affects your mind, doesn't it? Anxiety, depression.
Oh, okay. Now we're getting into my new, all right. So I can go from being enthusiastic to being geeky excited, and I have to watch it.
Geek out. I'm okay with that.
Well, so I've been, I think one of the most humbling experiences is actually the fact that it's not really that we developed this product and I'm excited that we're helping people. The real humbling experience is how much I didn't know before. I mean, I've been in practice for 15 years. I went to whatever it is, college, 4 years of college, 4 years of med school, 6 years of specialty training. And then I was in practice for a few years till I finally started, fortunately I bumped into some great scientists like Dr. Pimentel, where, he's saying, no, I think this is this. And then it took 10 years after that to go, oh my gosh, there's so much I don't know. And now we're breaking down these barriers. Well, one of the things is I went to a lecture. There's a functional medicine society called A4M, and I went to their lecture, I guess about 2 years ago. And a man that I respect very much, Dr. Alessio Fasano, who is the godfather of celiac disease. He's a pediatric gastroenterologist. And his lecture was not on celiac disease. It was on the epidemic of autism and obesity in children. And he had great data to show that it is actually leaky gut, which is leading to this. And then I went to a conference, which I just lectured at, actually, called PaleoFX, where another man that I respect very much, who's a neurologist, a brain doctor named David Perlmutter, he wrote a book called Grain Brain, and he gives this lecture about how dementia in Alzheimer's is caused by leaky gut. So both of these guys are saying that the true epidemic of these diseases, because my goal, as we age, everyone has, you have different goals as you're going through, but I realize that we're focusing so much on physical health, but we have so many people that are becoming, that have Alzheimer's or they have dementia. What's the point of living this life if your memories are stolen from you? So my real passion right now is the brain-gut barrier, is the brain-gut association. Yes. So if we can we have to protect both at the exact same time. So we now know that inflammation, for your listener, for you that's sitting at home watching this again, if you have found that you are bloated and you have anxiety or depression or OCD or anything there in the spectrum, there could be a reason that we know that if bacteria is growing, and that whole thing where I talked about the inflammation, it can actually irritate a cell that lives right there in the GI tract called a mast cell. That mast cell, when it gets angry or when it gets irritated, sends its little signals, one of them being histamine, serotonin, and tryptase, but it dumps its contents on the nearest nerve. And then that nerve runs like a conduit to the central nervous system, meaning the mast cell tells your brain something's wrong. And we now have shown that when you have gut inflammation, you will have brain inflammation. So when I sit and talk to my patients and I say, do you ever feel like you're in a brain fog? And they stop and they go, I do. Why? I'm like, do you ever feel fatigued? Have you had more anxiety than you normally have? And they go, yes. And I'm like, okay, what I think is going on is that we're actually irritating one of the cells there. That's how come I'm a big fan of other things to help the brain also, which is Atrantil to fix the gut, cannabidiol or CBD oil to decrease brain inflammation. And so that's my next level of, we want to, by fixing the gut, we're going to help the brain, but we also have to help the brain. So a lot of the symptoms that are going on really affect the brain. Another layer to it is the fact that if you have a poor diet and you eat a lot of these refined foods and you crave it, what people don't realize is, and I have to have this talk with my patients where, especially my pre-diabetic or diabetic patients, and we're struggling with weight loss, and they're like, I don't understand. It's like, I feel like I'm like you're addicted, or like you're being told to eat this. And it's very interesting because that postbiotic thing that we were talking about, we now know that the bacteria that want those sugars, that want those refined foods, they will proliferate and they can send signals to tell you to go get more because you're feeding the ones that want to do that. Same aspect. When you eat a lot of polyphenols, good molecules for you, those bacteria proliferate. Instead of the, I want my donut, it's I feel better when I'm eating these colorful fruits and vegetables, and they send anti-inflammatory signals to the brain. So a lot of times people get so frustrated and they blame themselves and they get angry at themselves. And I just tell them, I said, hey, some of this might be out of your control. Why don't we play with your bacteria? Let's feed the bacteria that I want to proliferate, and you'll have a better success at both losing weight, controlling your anxiety, possibly depression. And it'll take a little time, but you can do this. And then once that gets reset, then everything goes back to normal.
Wow, that's amazing. And I remember reading a long time ago when I was researching vaccines that there was a lot, and I think there still is a ton of theory about the fact that it's not necessarily vaccines that trigger autism. It's that it's a compromised gut, compromised microbiome that the vaccine is too strong for, whatever's in the vaccine. It then triggers, or it's just like the straw that breaks the camel's back or whatever that is, but something like that it's something to do with your gut microbiome. And that's why kids with autism do so well, or at least a lot of them do, when you remove a lot of those inflammatory foods out of the diet.
Yeah, I'm not a vaccine expert. Admittedly, I'm an adult doctor, and I'll leave that to some other people. I've been to some conferences where people give some very interesting data about vaccines. But I will make this comment. I do have a lot of patients that are on the spectrum, from Asperger's all the way to autism. And it is fascinating that when we control their gut, their behavior improves. So I've had some very extreme patients which have to be admitted to the hospital because they're very violent towards their mother. And it's a very difficult situation. You have this loving mother that doesn't understand why this child becomes nonverbal, and a month ago they were actually able to communicate. I think it all comes down to that brain inflammation that we talk about. And when we treat their gut, they can actually, that actually gets a little bit more controlled. And the same thing happens if you're not on the spectrum like that. So if it's not autism, but I do have a lot of patients that get very anxious when they eat certain foods, and it's pro-inflammatory. So I think that the future of all of this is all headed in the right direction. And we're going to get into how brain inflammation in the gut, same thing when we talk about brain trauma, traumatic brain injury. I'm working with some scientists right now where we're looking at CBD oil and polyphenols to decrease brain inflammation in people that have sustained some sort of trauma. So I have friends that have played professional football, and I worry about them. They're my age. And, there's the repetitive trauma is another aspect. I keep saying the same thing over and over and over, no matter what disease we're talking about. IBS, traumatic brain injury, autism, autoimmune disease. There's one common thread. It is inflammation.
Gut.
Yeah.
Inflammation, but it's also leaky gut. Yeah.
Yeah. It all starts in the gut.
Yeah.
And if we can protect the gut and help that, then your body will decrease the amount of inflammation that it's actually being produced. We're getting sicker as a society. And, as you're probably very aware, but there's probably the way we raise crops, spraying Roundup on everything probably isn't helping. That recent article that just came out where they found Roundup in all the General Mills foods, cereals, Quaker Oats and things like that. You just go, ooh.
Oh, yeah.
Oh no.
It's terrible. It's terrible. It's quite scary actually, but we're on the right track and you're leading the way. You're one of the people that is changing it for everyone that's out there, which is amazing. And once again, I just really appreciate it because like I said, it's everybody right now. I don't know of anyone that doesn't have a gut problem.
Well, I think that it doesn't do any good if I'm sitting around talking to these scientists in closed circuits. I think that the real kudos should go to people like you that are making the effort to have a podcast or to have a video cast where you're sharing this information with people. We can go down so many different rabbit holes and you can get sidetracked. And when I have these scientists call me, I'll have a PhD that'll call me in from South America, be like, I've been working on this in my lab. And I'm like, oh, that's so fascinating. I'm like, is it a natural product? Yes, blah, 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 blah. And so now I'm working with people sending me data, and we're going to look at this. We're going to continue to study things. Ultimately, I want my company to do functional research. I want to be able to say, look, we want to do research on this stuff. We want to figure out what's good, what's BS. It's not just up to the pharmaceutical company to get this data. Let's try and figure this out. And it doesn't do any good if people are not out there sharing the message. You're taking the time to share it. And I want to thank you for doing that, Karen, because that's important. Thank
you. I appreciate it. So where can everybody find you and where can they find the product?
So the product can be found at atrantil.com. It's kind of a hard name to pronounce, but it's like
why the name, by the way, Dr. Ken? Why that? Very cool. Did you hear me trying to read it out? I'm like, I used to call it Atrantil. I was saying it wrong.
We have can you give me a box real quick and I'll show it. So it's spelled like this, Atrantil. It's like, my belly's better, Atrantil. So why the name? So when we realized that we had something that was very novel, we were able to get a patent on the ingredients, and you have to name something. Unfortunately, large pharmaceutical companies have whole divisions where they trademark names. And I mean, thousands of names, which is why new drugs that come out with these really weird names. You've probably seen commercials where they're like, Kisabi Maba, whatever. And you're like, try Kisabi Maba now for whatever, toenail fungus or something. And so when you try and name something, it cannot be phonetically nor visually close to anything that has already been trademarked. So I really felt like what I was trying to do is convey a sense of tranquility. I want you to feel like once we calm your gut down, you will have a tranquil life. So we went with Atrantil, and it seemed easy. And at the 11th hour, our attorney said there's this large pharmaceutical company, which is a trademark bully, and there's always the chance they could show up 5 years from now and sue you. So by putting the A in front, you're more than likely avoiding all trademark infringement. You can get it trademarked. So we put the A in front, and it became sort of our symbol. And I was too close to it. I mean, very, very passionate. And I kept telling myself, well, Kleenex seemed like a weird word at one time, and Nike seemed weird. Hopefully Xerox. Hopefully we end up being, just normal someday. And when next time somebody says, hey, can you hand me that, 10 years from now, when somebody goes, hey, hand me my anti-inflammatory polyphenol combination. Oh, you mean Atrantil? Yeah, whatever. And, because you don't ask for a tissue paper, you ask for a Kleenex. Say, can I have a Kleenex? I need to blow my nose. So that's what we hope to be. So in the early part, it's a little bit of a struggle, but I'm hoping that it'll become part of the vernacular everywhere. And, we just got our Canadian NPN number. So maybe with a slight Canadian accent, it'll sound better. What would
yeah, maybe. Yeah. So when's that going to be coming then in Canada? Because the Canadians can still order it out of the States. Because I know, because I've had my clients order it. But now you're going to be bringing it into Canada so that it'll be sold out of a Canadian market, basically. True, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I think we should be really close to doing that. We had to do the whole bilingual thing and everything. So a little learning curve there. So
you had to put everything into French too. Well, Atrantil could kind of be Frenchish. They'll probably be able to say it better than we can.
That's what I was so excited about, because I can't wait till we launch in in South America or something, because my Spanish patients say it perfectly. They're like, mira, doctor, Atrantil es perfecto. Yeah. I'm so good in Spanish. That's perfect.
Yes, it is. It's good. I like it. So
So I'm
that'll be
hoping it's
coming
going to
soon.
sound
Yeah.
really good in French also.
Yes, it will for sure. Yeah.
If it's not already there, I mean, literally, I think we're really close. So either
And
if
it'll be
you,
on Amazon, hey? You said?
I think it's on Amazon Canada, and we have it on Amazon here. And you know what? And the bottom line is we just want people to get better. It's 100% money back guarantee. If you take it correctly, 2 tablets 3 times a day, you have greater than an 88% chance of getting better. And, you know, I just want you at home listening that if you have this situation and you bloat after you eat, more than likely you're going to get better. If you don't, 100% money back guarantee. My goal is to make you better. That's our bottom line. Your goal, Karen, is to make your clients better. We're all in it for the same reason.
Absolutely. Yes. And so you guys can find it on Amazon, like you said. We do have a coupon code for all of my listeners, and the coupon code is Martel. And I will put everything, all the links in the show notes so you guys can, if you're interested, go find out more information or order yourself a bottle. And like you said, it's 100% guaranteed money back if it doesn't work for you. So you really don't have anything to lose, if you ask me. So thank you, Dr.
Yes,
Kenneth Brown.
Most importantly, I want to make sure that everyone that's listening here shows you a little bit of love. So we set up a special website for you called Love My Tummy /Martel. So go to Love My Tummy /Martel. Go ahead and show Karen some love. And if you're going to order it from that, or you can just go to atrantil.com. But I like Love My Tummy /Martel better.
Yeah, that's awesome. So thank you so much for coming on. It was very enlightening, and I'm sure that all of my listeners will appreciate everything you had to say.
Absolutely. And if you have any other questions, we can help each other out. I love what you're doing. Thank you for dedicating your time to help all these people.